Welcome back to the 535. I'm Brody Mullins. Today we have Ben Brubeck. I want to continue our conversation on the Republican Party, labor unions, and how the normal affiliations have been scrambled recently. Ben is a longtime Republican lobbyist with Government Affairs Solutions. You've been working in the labor union space and employment law for more than 2 decades. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the program. Congratulations on the program.
Thanks a lot. So tell us about sort of the evolution, or how did the long-time alliance between the Democratic Party and labor unions start to sort of unravel a little bit?
Yeah, well, I was in Washington, came here back in 2003. You know, the labor unions and Democrats were kind of working hand in glove together. Absolutely. On everything. And you know, there were some Republicans who were supportive of the labor union agenda, especially the construction trade unions, the blue collar workers. Not really talking about government unions. But what we saw kind of over the last 2 decades is some Republicans being more vocal about it, being supportive of legislation, signing on to legislation. Those things were kind of no-nos and a little bit taboo back in the last 30 years. So
what changed?
Well, I think it's a little bit of where the Democrat Party has gone, to be honest with you. I think it's gone pretty far left and has alienated a lot of blue-collar voters and workers. And I think issues like NAFTA and trade and where we are with infrastructure to some degree, I think that's alienated a lot. And Republicans, some of them were really trying to bring more of these blue-collar voters into the party, which include union voters. And in America, in the construction industry, which is where I've done a lot of my work, less than 10% of the construction workforce is unionized. So they've been trying to figure out a way to bring those folks in to some degree, but it's only been a handful of those Republicans. Hasn't been the overall majority.
So, I spent 20 years with the Wall Street Journal covering union issues and corporate issues, and the last major bill I remember covering that unions had a chance on was the card check bill, which I looked up last night, was 2007.
Yeah.
19 years ago was
Yeah.
the last time, in my mind, that unions had a big legislative priority. Now that lost.
Yeah.
But now they're making a comeback, right, with a couple of these new pieces of legislation. Let's talk about the PRO Act.
Yeah, that bill you're talking about is called the Employee Free Choice
Correct.
Act, right? And so that failed when Democrats had full control of the White House and both chambers of Congress. And then the new bill, the PRO Act, is sort of another iteration of that. And basically what that tries to do is undermine state right to work laws and get rid of independent contractor status, strip workers of the right to a secret ballot, all those types of things that were in the Employee Free Choice Act, but have kind of softened a little bit and trying to go back at it. So that the unions are pretty frustrated because they haven't been able to get that over the agenda, over the finish line. And so what they've been doing is they've been looking for regulatory activity through the White House, through the National Labor Relations Board, and through some one-off pieces of legislation to get their priorities over the finish line. And so there's been a bill recently that people have been talking about, the Faster Labor Contracts Act, which is a sort of piece of the broader PRO Act that's been broadly defeated. And that bill would force both unions and businesses into binding arbitration with a third-party federal arbiter if there was no way to get to a contract within 150 days. And so that's really not great. That's a lose-lose for both small businesses and for the unions because they're getting terms that may not make sense for both parties. But it's a way to try to make unionization a lot easier.
So let's get deeper into that one in a second, but
Yeah.
let's go back. So for 20 years, unions have not been able to make progress legislatively on the Hill. The PRO Act didn't work in the Biden administration. And then you're saying unions are therefore going to the administration trying to work things administratively. That would normally be the playbook if Democrats were in charge. But here we have Trump as a Republican, Trump nominating the NLRB chair. And have they made progress with the Trump administration working through the
Yeah, they've definitely made some inroads with the Trump administration, which is a bit odd because the building trades unions, especially the ones that I've been working with and against in some instances, have spent basically 3 cycles trying to make sure that President Trump doesn't get elected and also pretty much opposing every Republican up and down the ballot and spent hundreds of millions of dollars in that space. But they've gone to the White House and made this political overture that, hey, we represent blue-collar workers. We think we can help you win in swing states and make the difference in some of these tight races. And you've seen different unions try to provide political support as well as contribution to some of these unions in some of these close House districts where Republicans are running, in a very, very tight race.
Yeah, so now let's jump forward. You were talking about the Faster Labor Contracts Act.
Yep.
This is a provision that was sort of taken out of the PRO Act.
Right.
It's is being blocked by House Republican leadership.
Right.
But then what happened?
Yeah, so the bill is introduced by Congressman Donald Norcross from New Jersey. He's actually a union member, an IBEW member, and so he's trying to make it easier for his friends to get more membership because they've had declining membership for years. And so he offered this bill, and there were 100 co-sponsors. There were 17 Republican co-sponsors, which raised a lot of eyebrows. And now recently, Congressman Norcross has offered what they call a discharge petition to try to facilitate a floor vote and bypass the normal committee structure and votes.
And so how many votes do they need?
They need 218, that's the magic number to get a discharge petition over the finish line. And right now they have, I think, 209 folks, wow, which is a lot. And there are 2 Republicans that have actually signed on to.
And that's Mike Lawler?
Mike Lawler from New York, and then Max Miller from Ohio. He just signed on yesterday. So they're only a handful of votes away from getting this to discharge petition and a floor vote where it's unclear how this will shake out.
So many interesting things to unpack just here. So 2 Republicans are against their leadership and for the labor priority here, but not every Democrat's on it?
Not yet, not yet.
You think they will be?
I think it's possible. There might be some blue dog Democrats, which are a dying breed, that might actually not get on the bill, and I think there's been some that have concerns about just bypassing the process of having committee hearings and making sure the bill's fully vetted. And those are basic blocking and tackling that the institutions here really like to have.
Okay. So what is your guess on whether this is going to get to 218?
There's a lot of stakeholders on both sides of the aisle trying to fight this. There's a group called the Coalition for a Democratic Workplace that's pushing back on this, and they've been active proponents of the PRO Act, and this represents more than 600 businesses, small and large businesses across the country. And of course you've got the labor unions across the board that are really supportive of this, as well as the PRO Act and other things like that.
And it sort of jumps to a different issue I wanted to ask you about, which is it's easy for people to talk the talk. If you're a Republican in a blue-collar district, you can talk the talk with unions. This is the first time in 20 years that their Republicans may have to actually walk the walk, and we've got 2. Do you think this sort of rubber meets the road situation where these Republicans need to decide whether they're actually going to vote with unions and put up or shut up, basically?
I mean, it puts them in an uncomfortable position, right? I mean, you can talk the talk all you want, but the bigger question is is this a, bad romance? Is this fatal attraction for these Republicans that do this? Are they going to draw, strong primary challenges? And are the unions actually going to support them next time there's a good candidate that comes up that's with them 100% of the time? I mean, the trade unions are having to take some choices on these issues. Do they support someone who's with them, 40, 50% of the time versus someone who could be there 100% of the time with them? So it's an interesting dynamic we're watching closely. And there's a handful of Republicans that are taking that choice to support the unions in some of these issues, and we'll see how it shakes out in the long term.
So let's go back to the president. In his last convention, he really played footsie with unions. Unions had a bigger role than ever before at his convention. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it raised a lot of eyebrows when he invited Teamsters President Sean O'Brien to get a primetime speaking spot at the convention. It was like a 15-minute slot where he was really, really attacking the Republican establishment and really, surprised a lot of people in that audience. And basically, I think there was an understanding that if Sean O'Brien got out there and got the union message to a new audience, he might get something in return. And that might be someone like Labor Secretary Lori Chavez. Dreamer was a pick where it was announced when Sean O'Brien was down at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, and I think the other understanding was that the Trump administration would benefit from the Teamsters not endorsing a candidate, which they certainly have not done in the past, and they've endorsed some Republicans in the past, but recently they've endorsed Democrats up and down the board, and so this was maybe a way for both parties to benefit politically and on a big spotlight.
In the Senate, Josh Hawley has introduced the bill that would you're talking about before, the
Faster Labor Contracts
Act. Are there other Republicans in the Senate who are supporting this?
There are a handful. There are some Republicans that will generally be a little bit more supportive of the private sector blue collar workers on some issues too. So altogether in Congress, there's probably about 20, maybe 30 altogether that are you've got to watch closely on some of these labor votes.
And you've looked at the campaign finance numbers here. I mean, in my reporting, labor unions give almost 100% of their money to Democrats, maybe a little bit to Republicans. Is that changing a little bit now? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, so it seems like it's sort of like a 10% Republican to 90% Democrat contribution level. I actually pulled the data. I want to make sure I have it right. So the building trades unions, which is all the different unions that are in the construction industry, raised about $66 million last cycle and contributed about $72 million to different stakeholders. From their federal PACs, they gave $14 million altogether. 13 million went to Democrats and about 1.3 million went to Republicans. It's interesting to see what's going to happen this cycle. Will that increase? We've heard the Teamsters giving to some of these vulnerable Republicans to try to make inroads there. I don't think it's going to really be a huge total, but they're making bigger noise about this. And what's different from when I first came to Washington is some of the Republicans are excited about the donation and also the support. And that wasn't always the case. Sometimes it was kind of a quiet, oh, thank you, I'll keep this on the down low. So now it's a little bit different. The dynamics have changed a little bit.
Yeah, it's an amazing show. I mean, the fact that labor unions are supporting any Republicans at all is just mind-blowing. It shows how much is changing in Washington these days.
Yeah, and I'll just say there's so much money from the construction trade unions and the other labor unions in the system. I'm just talking about publicly disclosed money. There's a lot of dark money that's going out there from them too.
Right.
And we don't, that's affecting state ballot initiatives and state legislative activity. We've seen efforts during the 2010s to roll back, some of the union requirements in certain states, as well as pass right to work laws. And so they've used a lot of that dark money and this other funding, that $72 million that I talked about last cycle, to really move their legislative agenda all across the country, not just here federally.
Great. Ben Brubeck, thanks so much for joining us. We'll be right back on the 535.